Hello, fictional. Welcome to the What If Issei. Today we are gonna see what if Issei was born in heaven as an angel. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. In the eternal halls of heaven, where the light of the Almighty touched every corner and the air thrummed with celestial harmony, a new angel was born. Unlike other angels, who were created with solemnity and purpose, Issei Haidu arrived into existence with a bright mischievous grin on his face. His wings shimmered with an unusual vibrancy, catching the eye of all who saw him, and while his outward appearance exuded the purity of heaven, his aura carried with it a spark of something different. Michael, the leader of the angels and the right hand of God, watched over Issei's birth. His powerful presence was a calm, steady flame amidst a sea of divine light. Michael, as he often did, saw the potential within the young angel, even as Issei fidgeted and glanced around curiously at his fellow angels. The hierarchy of heaven was strict, and the laws that governed the angels were unwavering. Issei, Michael knew, would struggle with those laws, but that very struggle was what would make him special. Issei Michael's voice echoed across the heavens, gentle yet firm. The young angel straightened his posture, looking up at Michael with wide, eager eyes. You are born with a purpose, as all angels are. You are to be a guardian, a protector of the realms, and a servant of the light. Issei blinked up at Michael, his grin never fading. Sure. Guardian, protector, servant of light. Got it. His wings fluttered excitedly behind him, much to the amusement of the angels standing nearby. Michael's gaze softened, though he kept his expression neutral. I sense something in you, Issei. A desire to learn, to explore. These are good traits when tempered with discipline. However, you must remember that heaven has its laws. The angels of heaven are expected to adhere to these laws without question. Issei nodded, though his mind was already wandering, imagining what life as a guardian angel would be like. The responsibilities seemed heavy, but exciting. He had seen angels in battle, their wings blazing with holy light, protecting the divine balance across the realms. But what fascinated him more was the mystery of the human world. The tales of love, relationships, and the freedom humans had intrigued him, especially when compared to the disciplined life of an angel. As Issei grew, it became evident to the other angels that he was different. While his skills in battle were formidable, and his dedication to protecting heaven was undeniable, his playful, flirtatious personality constantly got him into trouble. Issei found joy in interacting with the female angels, often complimenting them on their beauty or making cheeky remarks that left them either amused or flustered. His fellow angels didn't quite know what to make of him, especially those who strictly adhered to the rigid codes of heaven. Gabriel, the archangel of purity, often shook her head at Issei's antics. You must take your duties more seriously, Issei, she would say. Your role as an angel is not to entertain yourself, but to serve the Almighty and His will. Issei would give her his most innocent smile. I'm serving. I'm just making sure everyone's in good spirits while I do it. Gabriel sighed, though she couldn't help but smile at his charm. Issei's heart was pure, even if his methods were unconventional. Michael, however, was not as easily charmed. Though he held deep respect for the young angel, he knew that Issei needed guidance and perhaps a task that would ground him in his duties. One day, after Issei had been caught sneaking into the archives of heaven to learn more about human relationships, something that was far from the standard angelic curriculum, Michael summoned him for a private audience. Issei arrived with his usual confidence, though he was aware that Michael's summons meant something important. The Great Hall of Heaven was a place of reverence, where the presence of God could be felt more acutely than anywhere else. Issei bowed low as he entered, his wings tucked respectfully behind him. You wish to see me, Lord Michael? Issei asked, his tone more serious than usual. Michael stood at the far end of the hall, his wings folded gracefully behind him, casting long shadows across the floor. His expression was unreadable, but Issei could feel the weight of his gaze. You have potential, Issei, Michael began, his voice resonating with the authority of heaven. But you lack the discipline necessary for an angel of your rank. You've been given gift, strength, charm, and resilience, but these must be honed with purpose. Heaven is not a place for whims or desires. Issei shifted uncomfortably, his usual confidence faltering under Michael's scrutiny. I understand, Lord Michael. Sometimes, I feel like there's more to being an angel than following the rules. Don't we protect humans because we care about them? Isn't it okay to be curious about their world? Michael's expression softened slightly. Curiosity is not a sin, Issei. But it can lead to temptation. You are still young for an angel, and you must learn to control your impulses before they control you. Issei nodded, feeling a mix of frustration and understanding. He knew Michael was right, but part of him still yearned for something beyond the strict confines of heaven. Michael continued, I have a mission for you. A task that I believe will help you mature and understand the weight of your responsibilities. There are sacred relics on Earth that must be protected. These relics hold great power, and if they were to fall into the wrong hands, it could upset the balance between heaven, hell, and the human world. Issei's eyes lit up at the mention of Earth. Finally, a chance to explore the human world. He tried to keep his excitement in check, but his wings fluttered in anticipation. Earth? Issei asked, barely able to contain his enthusiasm. You're sending me to Earth? Michael nodded. You will be tasked with guarding these relics and ensuring they remain hidden from both humans and devils. This mission will test your resolve, your discipline, and your ability to stay true to your duties as an angel. Issei's heart raced. This was his chance to prove himself, to show Michael and the others that he could be a responsible angel, even if his methods were a little unconventional. I won't let you down, Lord Michael, Issei said, his voice filled with determination. I believe you won't, Michael replied, though his tone carried a hint of caution. But remember, Issei, the human world is full of temptations. You must guard not only the relics but your own heart. Do not let curiosity lead you astray. Issei nodded, though the thought of seeing the human world up close filled him with excitement. He had heard stories of humans, how they loved, how they fought, and how they lived with a freedom angels could never fully understand. Part of him longed to experience that freedom, even if only for a short while. With his mission set, Issei prepared to depart for Earth. As he spread his wings and soared down from the celestial plains, the wind whipping through his feathers, he couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration. Earth awaited him, with all its mysteries and wonders. But deep down, Issei knew this mission was about more than just guarding relics. It was about proving to himself and to Michael that he could be more than the mischievous, flirtatious angel everyone saw him as. It was about finding his place in the grand design of heaven, even if that meant navigating the temptations and challenges that awaited him on Earth. Little did Issei know, this journey would change him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. For the human world had a way of revealing truths, both about itself and about those who ventured into it. Ascending from the ethereal heights of heaven, Issei Haidu felt the weight of his new responsibility pressing against his wings. The transition from heaven to earth was disorienting at first. Colors seemed sharper, the air thicker with the vitality of life, and the sounds of the world buzzing with an intensity he had never experienced before. Earth was alive in a way heaven was not. Heaven had always been serene and eternal, while Earth was constantly shifting, teeming with life, energy, and, above all, temptation. Issei landed quietly in a small town, tucked away from the chaos of big cities. His mission, entrusted to him by Michael, was to protect a sacred artifact hidden here, a relic imbued with divine power, sought after by both devils and angels. Its exact location had been passed down only to select angels, and now Issei was the latest in a long line of guardians tasked with ensuring that it remained safe from those who would misuse its power. The streets of the town were quiet as the evening sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm glow over everything. Issei tucked his wings behind him, concealing them from view, and adjusted his clothing to blend in with the human population. As he walked down the cobbled streets, he marveled at how different everything felt. The world of humans was tangible in a way heaven wasn't. The scent of freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery, the sound of laughter from a group of children, the casual exchanges of pleasantries between neighbors, it was all so alive. But there was one thing that particularly fascinated Issei as he walked through the town. The relationships between humans. It wasn't just the casual friendships or polite interactions that intrigued him, it was the romantic entanglements. Issei had read about love in heaven's archives, but seeing it in action was entirely different. Couples held hands as they walked together, exchanged kisses, and whispered sweet nothings to each other in passing. The intimacy, the closeness, it was unlike anything he had ever seen in heaven. Issei stopped in his tracks, watching a young couple in front of him. They were laughing together, the girl resting her head on the boy's shoulder as they strolled. It was so natural. Issei couldn't help but feel a pang of curiosity. How did humans experience love? What made their hearts race and their faces flush? In heaven, angels were devoted to their duties, bound by strict laws that left little room for personal connections, especially the kind that seemed to be so prevalent here on Earth. As the couple disappeared around a corner, Issei sighed and continued walking. He knew his fascination with human relationships could be dangerous. Michael had warned him about the temptations of Earth, and Issei was all too aware of the consequences if he strayed from his mission. But the longer he stayed on Earth, the more difficult it became to ignore the pull of human emotions. Eventually, Issei found his way to the heart of the town, where an old cathedral stood tall against the horizon. This was where the artifact had been hidden centuries ago, protected by the holy wards that surrounded the building. Inside, beneath layers of stone and divine magic, the relic lay dormant, waiting for its protector to keep watch. Issei stepped through the grand doors of the cathedral, the air inside cool and still. It was a sacred place, untouched by time. His footsteps echoed softly as he made his way to the altar, where he could sense the faint hum of the artifact's power beneath his feet. Everything was in place. The wards were still strong, and the relic was secure. For now. But Issei knew his task wasn't just to ensure the artifact stayed protected. His real challenge was to remain vigilant, to stay true to his duties despite the allure of the human world outside. Days turned into weeks, and Issei's routine became familiar. During the day, he kept watch over the cathedral, making sure the wards remained intact. At night, he would explore the town, learning more about human culture and life. The more time he spent among humans, the more he realized how complex they were. They had a freedom of choice that angels did not, free to love, to hate, to make mistakes, and to find redemption. It was both beautiful and terrifying. One evening, as Issei sat on a bench in the town square, watching the sunset, a voice interrupted his thoughts. "Hey, mind if I sit here?" Issei looked up to see a young woman standing in front of him. She had long brown hair, warm eyes, and a kind smile. Issei blinked, momentarily caught off guard by her presence. Sure, go ahead," he replied, scooting over to make room for her. The woman sat down beside him, sighing contentedly as she stretched her legs. "It's a beautiful evening, isn't it?" Issei nodded, trying to appear casual. "Yeah, it is. Earth is nice." She laughed softly. "You say that like you're not from here." Issei chuckled nervously. "Well, I'm new in town. Still getting used to things." The woman extended her hand to him. "I'm Aoi. I run the flower shop just down the street." Issei hesitated for a moment before shaking her hand. "Issei. I'm just passing through." They exchanged pleasantries for a while, and as the conversation flowed, Issei found himself more and more intrigued by Aoi. She was kind, gentle, and had a natural curiosity about the world around her. She told him about her life in the town, how she had grown up there and taken over the flower shop from her grandmother. She spoke of the people she knew, the relationships she had built, and the love she had for her work. Issei, for his part, tried to keep the conversation light, but his curiosity kept getting the better of him. "So, he began awkwardly, you must see a lot of couples buying flowers, right? For, romantic reasons." Aoi smiled. "Oh, definitely. Flowers are one of the best ways to express love, after all. I get people in every day looking for something special for their partner." Issei's mind raced with questions. "How do you know if you're in love? Like, how do humans feel it?" Aoi raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by his question. "That's a tough one. I guess it's different for everyone, but for me, love is when you care about someone so much that their happiness becomes more important than your own. It's a feeling of connection, trust, and warmth." Issei nodded thoughtfully, though he wasn't sure he fully understood. Angels were taught to love unconditionally, but it was a different kind of love, a love for all of creation, rather than the personal, intimate love humans seemed to experience. The more he heard, the more intrigued he became. Over the next few weeks, Issei found himself spending more and more time with Aoi. She would often invite him to the flower shop, showing him the different plants and explaining their meanings. Issei's fascination with human relationships only grew, and he found himself wanting to learn more about love, specifically, the kind of love that Aoi described. But with every passing day, Issei's guilt began to gnaw at him. He was supposed to be protecting the artifact, staying vigilant against any threats from devils or other dangers. Yet here he was, getting closer to a human woman, indulging in his curiosity, and feeling emotions that went against everything heaven had taught him. One evening, as Issei sat in the cathedral, gazing up at the stained glass windows, he felt a presence behind him. Turning, he saw Irina, one of his fellow angels, standing in the doorway. She had been sent to check on him, to ensure that he was staying true to his mission. "Issei," she said softly, her voice tinged with concern, "you've been on Earth for a while now. How are you holding up?" Issei forced a smile. "I'm doing fine, Irina. The artifact is safe, and the wards are holding. Everything's under control." Irina stepped closer, her gaze searching his face. "Is it really? I sense something different about you. You've been spending a lot of time with humans, haven't you?" Issei's heart sank. He couldn't lie to her, not after everything they had been through together as angels. I've been learning. About their lives, their emotions. It's just fascinating." Irina sighed, her expression softening. "I know Earth can be tempting, Issei. But remember why you're here. You're an angel, bound by the laws of heaven. You can't let yourself get too close to humans, especially not in the way you're thinking." Issei looked away, guilt weighing heavily on him. "I know, Irina. But it's hard. They feel so much. It's like they live more fully than we ever could." Irina placed a hand on his shoulder. "You were born with a purpose, Issei. Don't let that purpose slip away because of curiosity. You know what happens to angels who fall." Issei nodded, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He knew what was at stake: his mission, his place in heaven, and his very soul. As Irina left the cathedral, Issei sat alone in the fading light, wrestling with his emotions. The artifact was safe for now, but his heart was anything but. The air was thick with tension as Issei stood at the entrance of the cathedral, his eyes scanning the darkening horizon. The peaceful town, which had been a sanctuary for him during his mission, now felt different, foreboding, as if something unnatural was approaching. His instincts, honed by years of training as a high-ranking angel, screamed at him that a presence was drawing near, one that didn't belong on holy ground. Issei's heart raced as he stepped back inside the cathedral, making his way to the altar, where the sacred artifact lay hidden beneath layers of stone and divine protection. The wards were still intact, but he could sense the faint ripple of dark energy pressing against them, probing for weaknesses. Someone or something was testing the defenses. Devils, Issei muttered under his breath, his wings flexing involuntarily. It wasn't uncommon for devils to seek out the artifacts hidden by heaven. The relic he was guarding had the power to tip the balance of power between heaven and hell, and if it fell into the wrong hands, it could lead to catastrophe. Issei knew his mission was about to get much more dangerous. With a deep breath, Issei summoned his angelic power, his wings glowing faintly as he prepared to defend the cathedral. The energy of heaven flowed through him, steadying his nerves and sharpening his focus. But even as he readied himself for battle, a strange sensation tugged at the back of his mind, an odd mixture of excitement and curiosity. He had never faced devils before, and part of him wondered what they were really like. Suddenly, the grand doors of the cathedral creaked open, and a group of figures stepped inside, their presence immediately disturbing the sacred air. Issei's eyes narrowed as he took in the sight of the intruders. At the head of the group stood a striking young woman with long crimson hair and piercing blue eyes. She was dressed elegantly in a black and red uniform, her posture confident and commanding. Issei instantly recognized her. Rias Gremory, he whispered, his voice laced with both awe and caution. Rias Gremory was no ordinary devil. As the heir to the prestigious Gremory family, she held immense power and influence in the underworld. Issei had heard stories of her, tales of a devil with a strong sense of honor, but also one who played by her own rules. He hadn't expected to cross paths with her so soon, or at all, during his mission. Behind her, a group of devils fanned out, each one exuding their own unique aura of dark energy. But it was Rias who commanded Issei's attention. She stepped forward, her eyes locking onto him with a mix of curiosity and amusement. Well, Rias said, her voice smooth and teasing, an angel, guarding this old place. And here I thought I'd just be dealing with another set of boring wards. Issei straightened, his wings folding behind him as he met her gaze. This cathedral and its relic are under the protection of heaven. You and your kind have no business here. Rias raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on her lips. So serious, aren't you? I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. Angels are always so rigid in their ways. Issei bristled at her tone but forced himself to remain calm. Leave now, or I'll be forced to take action. Rias' smirk deepened as she took another step closer, her eyes never leaving his. Oh, I don't think you will. You don't seem like the type to jump into a fight without thinking it through. She tilted her head, studying him with a strange, almost playful intensity. You're different, aren't you? Not like the other angels I've encountered. Issei's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure whether it was her words or the way she looked at him that made him uneasy, but something about her felt dangerous. And not just because she was a devil. What do you want, Gremory? Issei asked, his voice firm, but not without a hint of curiosity. Rias shrugged, her eyes flicking briefly toward the altar. The artifact, of course. It's something my family has been interested in for a long time. But now that I see you here, she let her words trail off, her gaze returning to him. I'm more curious about you. Issei's wings fluttered slightly in response to her words. You're not getting the artifact, he said, his voice more confident now. And I'm not here to entertain your curiosity. Rias chuckled softly. I think you misunderstand, Issei. I'm not here to take it by force. At least, not yet. I'm here to see what kind of angel heaven has sent to protect it. Issei blinked, caught off guard by her casual tone. She wasn't like the devils he had read about in heaven's archives. There was something about her boldness, her confidence that intrigued him. And despite his best efforts to push it aside, he felt a strange pull toward her. Rias took another step forward, closing the distance between them. You know, she said, her voice lowering slightly, I've always wondered why angels are so strict with their rules. You're beings of light and purity, but you're not allowed to live freely, are you? No emotions, no desires, no fun. Issei stiffened. We live according to the laws of heaven. It's what makes us who we are. Ria's smile softened, and for a moment, her teasing demeanor faded. But what if there's more to you than that? What if you're not meant to be bound by those laws? Issei felt a flicker of doubt creep into his mind. What if she was right? What if there was more to his existence than following the strict rules of heaven? His time on Earth had already opened his eyes to new emotions and experiences, and now, standing in front of Rias, he couldn't help but wonder if he was destined for something beyond his angelic duties. I'm not interested in your games, Issei said, though his voice lacked the conviction he intended. I have a mission, and I won't be swayed by a devil's words. Ria's smirk returned, though there was a glint of respect in her eyes. Maybe not today. But I'll be around. We're not so different, you and I. Before Issei could respond, one of Ria's companions, a tall, muscular devil with dark hair, stepped forward. Rias, are we going to let this angel stand in our way? We could take him down easily and get what we came for. Rias held up a hand, stopping him. No sir. There's no need for violence today. She glanced back at Issei. I think our angel friend here needs some time to think about things. Issei clenched his fists, his angelic energy surging through him. He wanted to prove her wrong, to show her that he wouldn't be swayed by her words. But there was something about the way she spoke, the way she looked at him, that made him hesitate. Rias turned to leave, her group of devils following her toward the doors. But just before she stepped out, she looked over her shoulder and gave Issei a parting smile. I'll see you again, Issei. I have a feeling our paths are going to cross more than once. Issei watched her go, his mind racing. Part of him wanted to chase after her, to demand answers, to fight her if necessary. But another part of him, the part that had been growing ever since he arrived on Earth, was intrigued by her. Rias Gremory was unlike anyone he had ever met, angel or devil. And despite his better judgment, he found himself drawn to her. As the doors closed behind the devils, Issei sank to his knees, his wings drooping. He had never felt so conflicted in his life. His mission was clear: protect the artifact, uphold the laws of heaven, but now, everything felt uncertain. Was he destined for more than just following orders? Was there a part of him that longed for something else, something he wasn't allowed to have? And most troubling of all, was Rias right about him? The question swirled in his mind, and for the first time, Issei began to wonder if his place in heaven was as secure as he had always believed. The days following his encounter with Rias Gremory were the most confusing in Issei's life as an angel. His heart, once steady and committed to his mission, now wavered with every passing thought of the devil who had invaded both his sacred mission and his mind. Her words echoed constantly, challenging him, tempting him, making him wonder if there was truth to the doubts she had planted. As Issei patrolled the quiet halls of the cathedral, his steps felt heavier, burdened with questions he had no answers to. His thoughts kept drifting back to her confident smile, the way her eyes seemed to see right through him, the unshakable feeling that she understood something about him that even he couldn't grasp. And worse yet, the curiosity about her wasn't just intellectual. It was personal, emotional, even physical. Shaking his head, Issei tried to focus on the task at hand. The artifact was secure beneath the altar, and the wards around the cathedral remained strong, untouched by any devilish influence. But even as he reassured himself of this, his mind wandered to more dangerous thoughts. The freedom Rias had spoken of, the idea of living outside heaven's strict laws, and the tantalizing allure of the human world. More than ever, Issei felt the weight of heaven's expectations pressing down on him. How was he supposed to reconcile his duties as an angel with the growing emotions he felt? What if there was truth in Ria's suggestion that he was different from other angels? That afternoon, as Issei wandered aimlessly through the town, the familiar scent of blooming flowers drifted toward him. He found himself standing outside Aoi's flower shop, where they had shared several conversations in the past weeks. Aoi was kind, warm, and human, a reminder of everything Issei found intriguing and perplexing about the human world. She waved at him from inside, beckoning him to enter. Issei. Good to see you again. Are you here for more of those flower tips? Aoi teased with a bright smile, her brown hair bouncing as she moved around the shop, tending to her plants. Issei smiled back, though it felt strained. Hey Aoi. No, just passing by. She noticed the weariness in his voice and set down the flowers she was arranging. You seem troubled, she said softly, walking over to him. Everything alright? Issei's heart skipped a beat. She always seemed to know when something was bothering him, even though she had no idea who or what he really was. Sometimes, it was easier to forget his celestial duties when he was around her, to pretend that he was just another human, free to live without the burden of heaven's laws. It's nothing, Issei said, though the life felt hollow. He forced a smile. Just thinking about responsibilities. Aoi raised an eyebrow, her expression softening. Well, don't think too hard. Life's too short to get bogged down by things that weigh you down. Her words, though innocent, struck Issei like a hammer. Life's too short. For angels, life was eternal, but what kind of life was it if he felt so bound by duty? Wasn't he supposed to protect humans? How could he do that if he didn't understand them, or worse, if he wasn't allowed to feel the things they did? I guess you're right, Issei muttered, trying to shake off the tension. But the more he interacted with Aoi, the more the question gnawed at him. Was he destined to follow heaven's laws without question, or was there a place for individuality? Could he reconcile his growing emotions with his angelic nature? That night, as Issei returned to the cathedral, he found someone waiting for him near the altar. Irina, his fellow angel and childhood friend, stood with her arms crossed, her wings faintly shimmering in the dim light. Her expression was one of both concern and disappointment. Issei, she began, her voice laced with a mixture of worry and frustration. I've been watching you. You're not yourself. Issei tensed, already knowing where this conversation was going. I'm fine, Irina. The artifact is safe, and the wards are holding. That's not what I'm talking about, Irina said, stepping closer to him. You're distracted. Ever since you came to Earth, you've been different. Different how? Issei asked, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew Irina cared for him, but her presence only reminded him of the very laws that were suffocating him. You've been spending too much time with humans, she said, her voice soft but firm. I know how tempting Earth can be, but we're angels, Issei. We have a higher purpose. You can't let yourself get caught up in human emotions. Issei looked away, unable to meet her gaze. Is it wrong to be curious about them? To understand them? Irina sighed, her wings fluttering in frustration. It's not about curiosity. It's about letting that curiosity consume you. You know what happens to angels who stray too far from their path. The unspoken truth hung between them like a sword. Issei knew all too well what she was referring to. The fallen angels, those who had once served heaven but had been cast out for their desires, their defiance, their inability to conform to heaven's laws. I'm not like them, Issei said, though his voice wavered. Irina placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression softening. I know you're not, but I'm worried. You're questioning things that shouldn't be questioned. You have a mission, Issei. Don't let your emotions lead you astray. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Issei could feel the weight of Irina's words pressing down on him, but at the same time, he felt the pull of something greater, something that couldn't be confined to the rigid structure of heaven. The human world, with all its complexity and emotion, had opened his eyes to a life he hadn't known was possible. What if, Issei began, his voice barely above a whisper, what if there's more to being an angel than just following orders? Irina's eyes widened, her grip tightening on his shoulder. Don't talk like that, Issei. You know the laws of heaven. Our duty is to protect, to serve. There's no room for individuality. Issei finished for her, his voice gaining strength. What if I don't want to be just another soldier following orders? What if I want to understand what it means to live? Irina's expression shifted from concern to disbelief. Issei, you're talking like a fallen angel. You can't. I'm not fooling, Issei interrupted, his frustration boiling over. I just want to know if there's more to life than what we've been told. Humans get to choose. They get to love, to feel, to make mistakes. Why can't we? Irina stepped back, her wings spreading slightly in a defensive posture. Because we're not human, Issei. We're angels. We're not bound by the same weaknesses they are. But maybe that's the problem, Issei muttered under his breath. Maybe that's why we don't understand them as well as we think we do. For a moment, Irina looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of the friend she had known for so long. But all she saw was an angel on the verge of losing his way. I don't want to see you fall, Irina said softly, her voice trembling. Please, Issei. Don't let these thoughts consume you. Issei didn't respond. His mind was racing, torn between the loyalty he felt toward his mission and the growing desire for something more, something he couldn't define, but could feel pulling him away from the life he had always known. As Irina left the cathedral, Issei stood alone in the silent darkness, his wings drooping behind him. The conversation had left him more confused than ever, but one thing was clear. He couldn't ignore the questions burning in his mind any longer. Over the next few days, Issei's internal conflict only grew worse. He continued to perform his duties, ensuring the safety of the artifact and maintaining the wards around the cathedral, but his heart wasn't in it. Every time he thought about Rias or Aoi, the same questions surfaced, questions about love, freedom, and the strict laws that governed his existence. He found himself returning to Aoi's flower shop more often than he should, drawn to the simplicity and warmth of her presence. She had no idea what he was or the struggles he faced, but that was part of the appeal. With her, he could pretend, even for a little while, that he wasn't bound by the heavy responsibilities of heaven. But then there was Rias, bold, mysterious, and utterly unlike anyone he had ever met. Her words haunted him, challenging everything he had believed about himself and his purpose. Could he really be something more than just a soldier of heaven? Could he live a life that wasn't bound by the strict laws of the divine? Late one night, as Issei lay on the stone floor of the cathedral, staring up at the stained glass windows, he felt a presence. I knew I'd find you here. Issei sat up quickly, his wings flaring in surprise. Rias stood in the doorway, her devilish aura unmistakable, yet her expression was softer than he had expected. What are you doing here? Issei asked, his voice steady but filled with confusion. Rias stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with that same curiosity he had seen in their first encounter. I came to talk. I think we both know there's more going on here than just a mission to guard some relic. Issei's heart pounded in his chest as he stood, his wings folding behind him. He knew he should send her away, that this was dangerous, but part of him wanted to hear what she had to say. Talk about what? Issei asked cautiously. Rias' smile was both playful and serious. About you. About what you really want. Issei stared at her, the pull between his duty and his desires becoming unbearable. He could feel himself teetering on the edge, unsure of which path to take. For the first time, he wondered if there was truly a way to reconcile his nature with his mission, or if he was destined to fall. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a pale, eerie glow over the cathedral. Issei stood at the entrance, staring out into the night. The town was quiet, but there was a distinct tension in the air, a subtle warning that something was amiss. His wings twitched slightly as he scanned the horizon, sensing a shift in the spiritual energy around him. Something dark was approaching, something that didn't belong in this holy place. His thoughts were still a tangled mess from his recent conversations with Rias and Irina. Their words haunted him, Rias with her tempting vision of freedom, and Irina with her firm reminder of his duties. But now, standing alone in the stillness of the night, Issei could feel the weight of his internal conflict pressing down on him more than ever. He was stuck between the life he had always known and the pull towards something different, something unknown. Suddenly, the air around him shifted, growing colder and more oppressive. Issei's heart raced as he sensed a dark presence closing in. He instinctively spread his wings, readying himself for a confrontation. The faint glow of his angelic power surrounded him as he stepped out of the cathedral, determined to face whatever threat approached. From the shadows, a group of figures emerged, their dark wings casting long, ominous shadows on the ground. Issei's breath caught in his throat as he realized who they were, fallen angels. He had heard stories of them in heaven, angels who had once served the light but had been cast out for their defiance. They were powerful, seductive, and dangerous. At the head of the group stood a woman, her raven black wings spread wide behind her. She was stunning, with long, dark hair and piercing violet eyes that seemed to glow in the moonlight. Her aura was intoxicating, a mix of power and allure that made Issei's heart race. He knew immediately who she was, Rainer, one of the most notorious fallen angels in the underworld. Well, Rainer purred, her voice smooth as silk. What do we have here? A lost little angel far from home. Issei tensed, his wings twitching as he prepared for a fight. I'm not lost, he said, his voice steady despite the unease creeping up his spine. And you're not welcome here. Rainer smirked, taking a step closer. The other fallen angels fanned out behind her, their dark energy filling the air with a palpable sense of danger. Oh, don't be like that, Issei, she said, her tone teasing and seductive. We're not here to cause trouble unless you want us to. Issei's eyes narrowed. What do you want, Rainer? Rainer tilted her head, her eyes scanning him with interest. I've heard about you, Issei Haidu. An angel who doesn't quite fit the mold, They say you're different. Issei's heart skipped a beat. The way she spoke, as if she already knew everything about him, made him feel exposed. Vulnerable. He clenched his fists, trying to keep his emotions in check. I'm not like you, he said firmly. Rainer laughed softly, the sound like music laced with poison. Not yet, perhaps. But we all started where you are now, questioning, doubting, wondering if there's more to life than following heaven's rules. She stepped even closer, her dark wings brushing against the air like whispers of temptation. Tell me, Issei, don't you ever wonder what it would be like to be free? To live without the chains of heaven's laws holding you down? Issei's breath hitched. He wanted to deny it, to reject the idea entirely. But her words struck a chord deep within him. The very questions that had been plaguing him since he came to Earth echoed in her voice. Was he truly bound by the laws of heaven, or was there a way to live outside of them? I'm not interested, Issei said, though his voice lacked the conviction he hoped for. Rainer's smile widened. Oh, I think you are. I can see it in your eyes, in the way you hesitate. You're not like the other angels, Issei. You have desires, needs, a curiosity that's been suppressed for too long. She reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against his arm. You can't deny it forever. Issei flinched at her touch, but the warmth of her hand sent a shiver down his spine. Her words stirred something inside him, something he had been trying to suppress ever since his encounter with Rias. The idea of freedom, of living without the strict rules of heaven, was dangerously appealing. But he knew the price of that freedom. Once an angel fell, there was no going back. You don't have to be afraid, Rainer continued, her voice low and seductive. We're not the monsters heaven makes us out to be. We're just like you angels who wanted more from life. And now, we're free to live as we please. No more restrictions, no more duties. Just freedom. Issei closed his eyes, fighting the pull of her words. He knew what she was offering, and part of him was tempted. The idea of living without the constant pressure of heaven's laws, of being able to explore his own desires without guilt, was intoxicating. But he also knew what it meant to fall. He had seen the consequences, heard the stories of angels who had lost everything for a taste of that freedom. I can't, Issei whispered, his voice barely audible. Rainer's smile faded slightly, though her eyes remained locked on his. You can't, she said softly. It's your choice, Issei. No one can make it for you. You can keep pretending to be the good little angel, or you can embrace what you really are. Issei felt his resolve slipping. The temptation was overwhelming, and Rainer's presence only made it harder to think clearly. He could feel the darkness creeping in, threatening to pull him down into a place he knew he might never escape from. But then, in the midst of his turmoil, a familiar voice echoed in his mind, Michael's voice, calm and steady. Issei, your path is your own to choose. The memory of his last conversation with Michael came flooding back. Issei had sought advice from his leader, desperate for guidance as his internal conflict grew more intense. He had expected Michael to tell him what to do, to give him clear instructions on how to handle the temptations he was facing. But instead, Michael had offered him something far more daunting. This is a decision only you can make, Issei, Michael had said, his eyes filled with both wisdom and sadness. Heaven's laws are not easy to follow, but they are there for a reason. You must ask yourself what matters most to you, your duty as an angel, or the freedom to live as you desire. But remember, once you choose to fall, there is no turning back. The words had weighed heavily on Issei, and now, standing face to face with Rainer, they rang truer than ever. He could feel the pull of freedom, the allure of living without the constraints of heaven. But he also knew what he would lose: his place in heaven, his connection to the light, and perhaps even his very soul. Issei took a step back, his wings spreading slightly as he put distance between himself and Rainer. I'm not like you, he said, his voice stronger now. I won't fall. Rainer's eyes darkened, her smile fading into something more dangerous. You say that now, she whispered, her voice losing its seductive lilt and taking on a more menacing tone. But the longer you stay here, the more you'll realize that heaven doesn't have a place for angels like you. Issei's heart pounded in his chest, but he held his ground. He knew she was trying to get into his head, to make him doubt his place in heaven. But deep down, Issei knew that he couldn't let himself fall, no matter how tempting the idea of freedom seemed. I won't fall, Issei repeated, his wings glowing with a faint, steady light. You should leave. Rainer's eyes narrowed, her wings twitching behind her. For a moment, Issei thought she might attack him, but instead, she simply smirked, the dangerous gleam returning to her eyes. Very well, little angel, she said, her voice dripping with dark amusement. But remember this: when you finally realize that heaven isn't the paradise you think it is, I'll be waiting. With that, Rainer turned on her heel, her dark wings flaring out behind her as she and her group of fallen angels melted back into the shadows. Issei stood frozen for a moment, his heart still racing from the encounter. The air felt heavy with the lingering presence of darkness, but slowly, it began to dissipate. As the night returned to its quiet stillness, Issei let out a shaky breath. He had resisted the temptation, but the encounter had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. Rainer's words lingered in his mind, gnawing at his resolve. He had made his choice for now. But how long could he continue to resist the pull of freedom? The days following Rainer's visit passed in a blur of confusion and uncertainty for Issei. Her words lingered in his mind, an insidious whisper that grew louder with each passing moment. He was constantly on edge, caught between the safety of his duties as an angel and the tantalizing allure of the freedom she had offered. And then there was Rias. Her presence in his life was becoming more frequent, more consuming, and far more dangerous. Issei found himself spending more time with Rias than he should, not because she was trying to steal the artifact, but because she seemed to understand him in a way no one else could. Unlike Rainer, who sought to manipulate his doubts, Rias was direct, genuine, and undeniably compelling. She didn't hide her intentions, she wanted the artifact, but more than that, she wanted to know who Issei really was beneath the surface of his angelic exterior. And Issei wasn't sure who he was anymore. One afternoon, he met Rias in a secluded part of the town, near the edge of a forest that bordered the cathedral grounds. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees, and the air was filled with the soft chirping of birds returning to their nests. Issei had hoped that spending time with her would help him clear his mind, but instead, his feelings for her only grew stronger, more complicated. Every glance, every touch, made his heart race, and with it, the guilt surged in his chest. You're distracted, Rias said, her voice soft but teasing. She leaned against a tree, her crimson hair cascading over her shoulders, her eyes watching him with an intensity that made his wings twitch involuntarily. Issei tried to laugh it off, but his smile was weak. Yeah, you could say that. Let me guess, Rias continued, stepping closer to him. You're still thinking about what Rainer said to you. About freedom. Issei winced, surprised by how easily she had read his thoughts. It's not that simple. Rias raised an eyebrow. Isn't it? You're torn, Issei. I can see it every time we're together. You want more than just following orders from heaven, but you're afraid of what it might cost you. Issei swallowed hard. She wasn't wrong. But he didn't know how to put into words the battle that was raging inside him. On one hand, there was his duty, his loyalty to Michael and heaven, the purpose he had been given since birth. On the other hand, there was the pull of something greater: freedom, individuality, the chance to live on his terms. And then there was Rias herself. His feelings for her were growing stronger every day, feelings that heaven's laws would never allow him to act on. Angels weren't meant to love in the way humans or devils did. You're asking me to give up everything I've ever known, Issei said quietly, his eyes searching hers for some kind of answer. Ria's expression softened and she stepped closer, her hand resting lightly on his arm. I'm not asking you to give up anything, Issei. I'm asking you to choose. For yourself. Isn't that what you really want? Issei looked down at her hand, the warmth of her touch sending a shiver through him. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that he was committed to his mission, to the laws of heaven. But every time he looked into her eyes, the words stuck in his throat. Before he could respond, a surge of dark energy pulsed through the air, sending a chill down his spine. Issei snapped to attention, his wings flaring instinctively as he turned toward the source of the disturbance. It's them, Rias said, her voice suddenly tense. Rainer's forces. Issei's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel it now, the unmistakable presence of fallen angels closing in on the cathedral. They were here for the artifact, just as Rainer had promised. Without a word, Issei spread his wings and took off toward the cathedral, Rias flying close behind him. The sky darkened as they soared through the air, and Issei could see the shadowy figures of fallen angels circling the cathedral, their dark energy clashing with the holy wards that protected the sacred ground. As they landed just outside the cathedral, Issei felt the weight of his inner conflict pressing down on him harder than ever. His duty was clear. Protect the artifact, defend heaven's laws. But as Rainer's forces attacked, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a battle for a relic. This was a battle for his soul. The fallen angels wasted no time in their assault, hurling dark energy at the cathedral's defenses, their wings creating gusts of wind that shook the ground beneath Issei's feet. Rainer herself hovered above them, her violet eyes gleaming with anticipation. Issei. She called out, her voice carrying over the chaos. Are you ready to make your choice? Issei gritted his teeth, his wings glowing with holy light as he prepared to defend the cathedral. He knew what Rainer was doing. She wasn't just here for the artifact, she was here for him. She wanted to push him to the breaking point, to force him to decide whether he would remain loyal to heaven or give in to the temptation of freedom. Rias stood beside him, her own aura flaring with power as she prepared to fight. We can take them, she said, her voice steady. But you need to focus. Issei nodded, but even as he readied himself for battle, the questions in his mind refused to go away. Could he truly continue living as a perfect angel, bound by the laws of heaven? Or was Rainer right? Was there something more waiting for him if he embraced the complexity of his own nature? The battle erupted in a flash of light and darkness. Issei launched himself into the fray, his wings blazing with holy energy as he struck down one fallen angel after another. Rias fought beside him, her power weaving through the air like a storm, and together they pushed back Rainer's forces. But no matter how many fallen angels they defeated, Issei couldn't escape the weight of his internal struggle. Rainer watched from above, her smile never fading as she directed her forces. You're fighting for the wrong side, Issei, she called out, her voice dripping with dark amusement. Don't you see? Heaven doesn't deserve your loyalty. You deserve to be free. Issei faltered for a split second, and in that moment, a blast of dark energy struck him, sending him crashing into the ground. He groaned, his wings flaring in pain as he struggled to get back on his feet. Rias was at his side in an instant, her eyes filled with concern. Issei, focus. She shouted, grabbing his arm. You can't let her get into your head. But Rainer's words had already burrowed deep into his mind. As he stood, his wings trembling with exhaustion, Issei found himself questioning everything. Why was he still fighting? Was it out of loyalty to heaven, or was it because he was afraid of what would happen if he let go? And what about Rias? Every time he looked at her, he felt something stronger than duty pulling him toward her. Rainer descended from the sky, landing gracefully in front of him, her wings casting long shadows across the ground. You can feel it, can't you? She said softly, her voice almost gentle now. The desire for freedom. You don't belong in heaven, Issei. You belong with us. Issei's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to deny it, to fight back against the temptation, but the words refused to come. He had spent his entire life following the laws of heaven, but now, standing on the precipice of something new, he wasn't sure if he could go back. Rias stepped between them, her power flaring with anger. Leave him alone, Rainer. Rainer's smile widened. Why, Rias? Are you afraid he might actually make the choice you want him to make? After all, you've been pulling him in your own direction, haven't you? Issei looked between the two women, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the pull from both sides, the promise of freedom from Rainer and the growing connection he felt with Rias. Both paths led away from heaven, but one offered him the chance to live without restrictions, while the other offered him something even more dangerous. Love. The battle around them raged on, but in that moment, all Issei could hear was the sound of his own heartbeat. His wings trembled as he stared at Rainer, then at Rias. This was the moment of truth. This was the price of freedom. I can't, Issei said, his voice barely a whisper. Rainer's eyes narrowed. What? I can't, Issei repeated, his voice stronger now. Not like this. Rias turned to him, her expression unreadable, but Issei could see the flicker of relief in her eyes. Rainer, however, was less pleased. Her smile twisted into a scowl, and her wings flared out behind her. Fool, she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. You think you can hold on to heaven's laws and still be free? You'll regret this. With a snarl, Rainer launched herself into the air, her forces retreating behind her as they disappeared into the night. The battle was over, but the war inside Issei was far from finished. As the dust settled, Issei stood beside Rias, his wings still glowing faintly in the aftermath of the fight. He had made his choice for now. But as he looked at Rias, he knew that the road ahead was still filled with uncertainty. The price of freedom, it seemed, was far greater than he had ever imagined. The cold night air hung heavy with the aftermath of the battle. Issei stood motionless outside the cathedral, his wings still trembling with residual energy. The sky above had cleared, leaving only the soft shimmer of stars overhead. But the serenity of the heavens seemed distant, almost mocking. Despite the temporary victory over Rainer's forces, the weight of what had transpired lingered in Issei's heart. He had made a choice, he had refused to fall. But that choice had come at a cost. The pole between heaven and earth, between duty and desire, had left him teetering on the edge. And now, as he stood in the quiet aftermath, he felt more lost than ever. Rias, standing a few feet away, watched him carefully. Her crimson hair glowed faintly in the moonlight, and her eyes, usually so confident and teasing, were filled with concern. Issei, she said quietly, stepping toward him. You fought well. But I can tell something's wrong. Issei's chest tightened. Something was wrong. No matter how hard he tried to focus on his duty, no matter how fiercely he had defended the artifact, a part of him felt like it had already slipped away. The battle wasn't just with Rainer or her fallen angels, it had been inside him, gnawing at his soul. He struggled to find the words. I don't know if I can keep doing this. Rias tilted her head, her expression softening. Doing what? Protecting the artifact? Being an angel? Issei swallowed hard. Both. Everything. I'm not sure if I belong anywhere anymore. Before Rias could respond, a sudden pulse of energy shot through the air, so strong and overwhelming that it knocked Issei off balance. His wings flared out instinctively, but something was wrong, something deep within him shifted, and for a brief terrifying moment, he felt an unfamiliar force pulling at him. No. Issei gasped, his voice breaking. He tried to steady himself, to summon the holy energy that had always been his strength, but it felt distant, unreachable. His wings flickered, the white glow dimming, and a deep cold sensation spread through his body. Rias rushed toward him, her eyes wide with alarm. Issei. What's happening? Issei clenched his fists, trying to control the growing darkness inside him, but it was no use. He had been fighting it for too long, pushing against the temptation, the doubts, the conflicting emotions. Now, it was as if everything he had tried to suppress was finally breaking free, overwhelming him. I can't stop it, Issei whispered, his voice trembling with fear. Rias reached out, grabbing his arm, but even as she touched him, Issei could feel the light leaving him. His wings, once bright and pure, began to darken, the feathers turning black like shadows creeping across his soul. He stumbled, falling to his knees, his wings hanging limply behind him, no longer the brilliant white of an angel, but the dark twisted remnants of what he had once been. No, Issei gasped, his voice choked with horror. No, no, no. His heart pounded in his chest, guilt surging through him as the full realization of what had happened crashed over him. He had fallen. Despite everything, despite his best efforts to stay true to heaven, he had failed. His wings, the symbol of his divinity, were now tainted, darkened by the very doubts and desires he had been struggling with. I fell, he whispered, his voice breaking. I'm a fallen angel. Rias knelt beside him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. She didn't say anything at first, only watched as Issei struggled to come to terms with the enormity of what had happened. He had crossed a line, there was no going back. The weight of his failure settled heavily on his shoulders, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly lost. I didn't mean for this to happen, Issei muttered, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't want to fall. Ria's hand gently squeezed his arm, her touch both comforting and grounding. I know. But sometimes, the choices we make, they lead us to places we never expected. Issei shook his head, guilt and shame twisting in his chest. I failed. I couldn't hold on. Michael, heaven, I let them down. Ria sighed softly. Issei, you didn't fail. You're still here. You're still fighting. Falling doesn't mean you've lost everything. But it felt like he had. He had spent his entire existence trying to live up to the expectations of heaven, to be the perfect angel, to follow the laws that governed his every action. Now, all of that was gone. His wings, once a source of pride, now marked him as something else, a fallen angel. Neither fully aligned with heaven nor entirely bound to hell, he was caught in between, a rogue element in the celestial conflict. As the reality of his situation began to sink in, Issei's thoughts turned to Michael. What would his leader say? Michael had always been a source of strength and guidance, the one who had trusted him with this mission. Issei couldn't bear the thought of facing him now, not like this. But he had to. He owed Michael an explanation. With trembling hands, Issei reached for the communication link that connected him to heaven. The faint glow of divine energy flickered in his palm, and he sent out a message to Michael, praying that his leader would still answer. A few moments later, a soft, ethereal light filled the air, and the familiar, imposing figure of Michael appeared before him, his wings blazing with holy radiance. Issei bowed his head, unable to meet Michael's gaze. The shame weighed heavily on him, like a stone pressing down on his chest. Issei Michael's voice was calm but tinged with disappointment. I see that you have fallen. Issei's heart sank even further at the sound of Michael's voice. I'm sorry, Lord Michael, Issei said, his voice barely above a whisper. I tried to stay true to heaven, but I couldn't. I failed. Michael remained silent for a moment, his eyes unreadable. Then, with a deep sigh, he spoke. It is true that you have fallen, Issei. But it is not the end. The path you walk now will be difficult and you will face challenges from both heaven and hell. But I still believe you have a role to play in the greater balance. Issei looked up in shock, confusion written across his face. You still believe in me? Michael's gaze softened, and for a moment, Issei saw a flicker of something resembling compassion. You are not the first angel to fall, nor will you be the last. Heaven's laws are strict, and sometimes, the weight of them is too much. But your fall does not erase the good you have done. It simply means your path has changed. Issei swallowed hard, his throat tightening with emotion. But what am I supposed to do now? I'm a fallen angel. I don't belong to heaven anymore. You still have a choice, Issei Michael said, his voice firm but kind. You are no longer bound by heaven's laws, but that does not mean you must give in to darkness. Your actions from here on will determine the course of your fate. You can choose to serve the greater good, even if you are no longer an angel of heaven. Issei stared at Michael, the words sinking in slowly. He had fallen, yes, but he wasn't condemned to darkness. He could still make choices, still fight for something greater. But the question remained. What would that be? As if reading his thoughts, Michael spoke again. You are a rogue element now, Issei. Neither bound to heaven nor hell. That makes you dangerous, but it also makes you powerful. The decisions you make from here on will shape the balance between light and darkness. With that, Michael's image began to fade, leaving Issei standing alone in the quiet night. The weight of his fall still pressed heavily on him, but there was a strange sense of clarity now. He wasn't lost. He still had a role to play, one that was uniquely his. Rias stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. You're a fallen angel now, Issei. But that doesn't mean you're alone. You don't have to face this new reality by yourself. Issei looked at her, his heart conflicted but grateful. She had been there for him, even when everything else had fallen apart. You're offering me refuge. Rias nodded. Yes. You may have fallen, but I still see who you are, Issei. You're not defined by heaven's laws. You can find your own way. For the first time since his fall, Issei felt a flicker of hope. He had lost his place in heaven, but maybe, just maybe, there was a new path waiting for him. And Rias was offering him a chance to figure it out. I thank you, Issei said softly, his voice filled with gratitude. As they stood together in the moonlight, Issei's wings, now black as night, fluttered gently behind him. He had fallen, yes. But he wasn't broken. Not yet. And maybe, just maybe, the fall was the beginning of something new. The morning air was crisp as Issei stood atop a hill, overlooking the quiet town below. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the landscape, and for the first time in days, he felt a sense of calm. The chaos of the battle, the confusion of his fall, and the overwhelming guilt that had consumed him were still there, but they had faded into the background, replaced by a strange tentative hope. Issei flexed his wings, now dark and feathered, symbols of his fallen status. The sight still unsettled him. He was no longer the angel he once was, bound by heaven's light. But in a way, his fall had freed him. He was no longer trapped by the rigid laws of heaven, no longer forced to suppress the parts of himself that didn't fit the mold of a perfect angel. He was his own person now, free to carve out a new path. But what would that path look like? Issei turned his gaze back toward the town, where Rias and her group of devils had made their home. After the battle with Raynor, Rias had offered him refuge, a place where he could figure out who he was now. And though he had once been heaven's soldier, standing against the devils, he found himself drawn to Rias and her group. They weren't the enemies he had been taught to fear. They were complex, like him, with their own struggles and desires. And, in them, Issei saw a reflection of his own journey. Rias had made her intentions clear. She wanted to protect Earth and the artifact from the forces of both heaven and hell. She didn't believe in the old dichotomies that separated angels and devils. To her, the world was a lot more complicated than that. And Issei had to admit, he agreed. His fall had shown him that the lines between good and evil weren't as clear-cut as he had once believed. Taking a deep breath, Issei spread his wings and took off toward the town, his dark feathers catching the morning breeze. He wasn't the same angel who had arrived here to protect the artifact, he was something new now. And it was time to figure out what that meant. As Issei landed in the courtyard of Rias' mansion, he was greeted by familiar faces. Rias' group of devils was gathered, their expressions a mix of curiosity and wariness. Issei had been staying with them for several days, but his presence as a fallen angel still felt like a disruption in the delicate balance they had built. Rias herself was standing near the entrance, her crimson hair glowing in the early sunlight. She smiled when she saw Issei, though there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, perhaps relief, or maybe something deeper. "You're up early," Rias said, her voice soft but teasing. "Couldn't sleep?" Issei smiled back, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I've had a lot to think about." Rias stepped closer, her gaze steady. "I know it's been hard, adjusting to everything. But I'm glad you're here, Issei. We need someone like you." Issei's heart warmed at her words, but there was still uncertainty gnawing at him. "You need a fallen angel." "We need someone who understands both sides," Rias corrected, her tone more serious. "Someone who knows the rules of heaven but isn't bound by them anymore. The artifact we're protecting, it's not just a tool of power. It's something that could upset the balance between heaven, hell, and earth. We need you on our side to protect it." Issei nodded slowly. It was true, he did understand the rules of heaven better than anyone here. And while he had fallen, his desire to do good hadn't left him. He still wanted to protect the world, to stop those who would use the artifact for destruction. But there was still tension in the air, and Issei could feel it. Not everyone in Rias' group was as welcoming as she was. As if on cue, Akeno stepped forward, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. "I still don't trust him," she said bluntly, her dark eyes fixed on Issei. "A fallen angel. How do we know he won't betray us the first chance he gets?" Issei winced at the accusation but held his ground. He had expected this reaction, especially from Akeno, who had a complicated relationship with angels due to her own past. She had never made it a secret that she was wary of him, and Issei couldn't blame her. He was a rogue element now, no longer part of the system that had once defined him. "Akeno," Rias said, her voice gentle but firm, "Issei has chosen to stay with us. He's not the enemy." Akeno's eyes narrowed, but she didn't argue. Instead, she turned on her heel and walked away, her long black hair swaying behind her. Issei watched her go, feeling a pang of guilt. He understood her distrust after all, he wasn't even sure if he trusted himself yet. But not everyone shared Akeno's suspicions. Asia, the gentle and kind-hearted healer of the group, stepped forward with a small smile. "I believe in you, Issei," she said softly. "I know it must be hard for you, but I think you're trying to do the right thing." Her words were like a balm to Issei's troubled soul. Asia had always been kind to him, even when the others had been more cautious. Her unwavering faith in him reminded him that there was still good in the world, even if he had fallen from grace. "Thanks, Asia," Issei said, giving her a grateful nod. Rias placed a hand on Issei's shoulder, her touch warm and steady. "We're a team now, Issei. We're all in this together." Issei glanced at her, feeling a strange mixture of gratitude and something deeper stirring inside him. His feelings for Rias had been growing ever since they had first crossed paths, and now, standing here with her, he realized just how much she meant to him. She had given him a place to belong when he had lost everything, and she had shown him that he didn't have to be bound by the labels of angel or devil. He could be something new, something in between. Over the next few weeks, Issei began to settle into his new role with Rias' group. They worked together to protect the artifact, keeping it hidden from both heaven and hell, while also fending off occasional attacks from Rainer's forces. It wasn't an easy life, but for the first time since his fall, Issei felt like he was finding his place in the world. He trained with the others, honing his skills as a fallen angel. His powers had changed, he could no longer call upon the pure holy light of heaven, but his fallen status had granted him new abilities. His dark wings gave him an edge in combat, and he found that he could manipulate shadows and darkness in ways he hadn't been able to before. It was strange at first, learning to control these new powers, but it also felt liberating. As Issei grew closer to the group, his relationship with Rias deepened as well. They spent more time together, often discussing their shared goal of protecting Earth from the forces that sought to destroy it. But their conversations weren't just about strategy, they talked about their lives, their dreams, and their fears. One evening, after a particularly grueling training session, Issei found himself sitting alone with Rias in the courtyard. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a soft glow over the mansion, and the air was filled with the quiet hum of crickets. "I never thought I'd be here," Issei said quietly, staring up at the stars. "A fallen angel, working with devils." Rias chuckled softly. Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? Issei smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in his expression. Do you ever regret it? Choosing this life? Rias was silent for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. No, she said finally. I don't regret it. I made my choice, and I stand by it. But there are moments when I wonder what it would have been like if things had been different. Issei nodded, understanding all too well. He had spent countless hours wondering what his life would have been like if he hadn't fallen, if he had managed to stay loyal to heaven. But now, sitting here with Rias, he wasn't so sure if that was the life he wanted anymore. You've helped me more than you know, Issei said, his voice soft. When I fell, I thought I had lost everything. But you showed me that there's still a path forward. I don't know what that path looks like yet, but I'm grateful. Rias turned to him, her eyes warm and filled with something he hadn't seen before, something deeper than friendship. Issei, you're not lost. You've always had a place here, with us. With me. The air between them seemed to shift, and for a moment, everything else faded away. Issei's heart pounded in his chest as he met Ria's gaze, the weight of her words sinking in. She wasn't just offering him a place in her group, she was offering him something more. Without thinking, Issei leaned closer, and before he knew it, their lips met in a soft, gentle kiss. It was a moment of pure connection, a release of all the tension and uncertainty that had been building between them for so long. When they finally pulled away, Ria smiled, her cheeks flushed. I think you found your new path, Issei. Issei smiled back, his heart lighter than it had been in weeks. Maybe he had fallen, but that didn't mean he was lost. He had found something new, something worth fighting for. And as long as Rias was by his side, he knew he could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Issei's days in the mansion had taken on a new rhythm, one that felt strangely right, despite the chaos that had brought him here. His life as a fallen angel had been uncertain at first, but now, with Rias by his side, things felt different, calmer, clearer, and more hopeful. He had found purpose not in heaven's rigid laws or in the balance between light and dark, but in something far simpler and yet more powerful. Love. His feelings for Rias had blossomed into something deep, something real, and it had become the guiding force in his life. He had once feared that falling from grace would mean losing everything, but instead, he had found something even greater, love itself. And for the first time since his fall, Issei felt like he understood what redemption truly meant. It wasn't about strict adherence to rules or following orders, it was about protecting the people and things that mattered most. On this quiet morning, Issei sat with Rias in the garden of the mansion, the two of them enjoying the peace that came with the early hours. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a warm glow over the flowers and trees, and the air was filled with the sound of birds chirping softly. Rias leaned against Issei's shoulder, her presence grounding him in a way that nothing else could. I never imagined I'd be here, Issei said quietly, his voice filled with a sense of wonder. A fallen angel, sitting in a garden with you. Rias chuckled softly, tilting her head to look up at him. Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? Issei smiled, but there was a deeper thought lingering in his mind. I've been thinking about love. Oh? Rias raised an eyebrow, intrigued. And what have you concluded? Issei hesitated for a moment, trying to put his thoughts into words. I used to think that redemption was something you could only get through heaven's approval. Like, following all the rules, being the perfect angel. But now I don't know. I feel like love, real love, is its own kind of redemption. It's not about being perfect. It's about caring for someone enough to fight for them, to protect them, no matter what. Ria's expression softened, her eyes filled with warmth. That's a beautiful way of seeing it. Issei looked down at her, his heart swelling with affection. You've shown me that. I thought I lost everything when I fell, but I've gained more than I ever had before. I've gained you. Ria smiled, but before she could respond, a sudden shift in the air caused Issei to tense. He felt it immediately, a divine presence, one that hadn't been near him since his fall. His wings twitched in response, and he stood up, his hand instinctively reaching for the sword at his side. They're here, Issei muttered, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the sky. Rias stood up beside him, her expression hardening. Heaven. Issei nodded. Angels. I can feel them. And then, as if summoned by his words, a brilliant light pierced the sky, and from it descended a group of angels, their wings blazing with holy radiance. At the head of the group was a figure Issei recognized immediately, Irina. Her golden wings shimmered in the sunlight, and her expression was a mixture of determination and sadness. Issei's heart clenched at the sight of her. Irina had been his closest friend in heaven, and seeing her now, leading a group of angels to confront him, brought a surge of emotions that he wasn't prepared for. Irina, Issei whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. Irina landed gracefully, her wings folding behind her as she stepped forward. The other angels flanked her, their expressions stern and unyielding. They were here for one reason: judgment. Issei, Irina said softly, though there was a tremor in her voice. It's been a long time. Issei's chest tightened. Not long enough, apparently. Rias stepped forward, her aura flaring with protective energy. What do you want, Irina? Irina's gaze flickered to Rias briefly before returning to Issei. We're here on orders from Michael. Heaven considers Issei a dangerous anomaly. A fallen angel who still wields great power and who has refused to return. Issei's heart sank. Of course, this was about Heaven's fear of him, of what he had become. He wasn't just any fallen angel, he had knowledge of Heaven's inner workings, and that made him a threat. But what hurt the most was seeing Irina, his friend, standing here as part of the group sent to bring him back. Michael wants to bring me back for judgment, Issei said, his voice heavy with resignation. Irina nodded, her eyes pleading. You have to understand, Issei. You've fallen, but there's still a chance for redemption. Michael believes you can be forgiven if you return willingly. Issei clenched his fists, his wings twitching behind him. Forgiven? For what? For falling? For questioning everything we were taught? Irina's eyes softened, her voice filled with regret. Issei, I know this has been hard for you. I've struggled too, trying to understand why you left. But you don't belong here, with them. She glanced at Rias, her expression conflicted. You belong in heaven. With us. Issei shook his head, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. I don't know where I belong anymore, Irina. But I do know this: Rias has given me something that heaven never could. She's given me a reason to keep fighting, even after everything I've lost. Irina's face fell, and for a moment, she looked like the friend Issei had known for so long, the one who had stood by his side through countless missions, who had laughed and trained with him, who had believed in him. But now, that friendship was clouded by their differences, by the paths they had chosen. I don't want to fight you, Issei, Irina said, her voice trembling. Please. Come back with me. We can fix this. Issei's chest tightened with emotion, but he knew what his answer had to be. I can't. I'm not the same angel I was, Irina. I've changed. And I can't go back to following Heaven's rules, not when I've found something worth fighting for here. Irina's eyes filled with unshed tears, but she didn't argue. She knew, deep down, that Issei had made his choice. Then this is goodbye. Issei swallowed hard, his heart breaking at the sight of her pain. I guess it is. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of their history hanging between them like an unspoken bond. But that bond had been broken, and now, they stood on opposite sides of a conflict neither had wanted. Irina took a deep breath, her wings unfurling behind her. Michael gave me orders to bring you back. But I'm not going to force you, Issei. I can't. The other angels stirred, clearly uncomfortable with Irina's decision, but none of them challenged her. They respected her too much for that. You're letting me go? Issei asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Irina nodded, though her eyes were filled with sorrow. I can't make you choose heaven. You have to find your own path, Issei. But I'll always remember the friend you were. Issei's throat tightened, and for a moment, he didn't know what to say. He had feared this reunion, dreaded what it would mean, but now, faced with Irina's kindness, all he could feel was sadness. Thank you, he whispered, his voice breaking. Irina gave him a small, sad smile before turning to the other angels. Let's go. Our mission is over. The other angels hesitated for a moment, clearly conflicted, but eventually, they followed Irina's lead, taking to the sky with their wings blazing behind them. As they disappeared into the distance, Issei felt the weight of what had just happened settle over him. I'm sorry, Rias said softly, stepping closer to him. That must have been hard. Issei nodded, his chest tight with emotion. It was. But I think it was necessary. Rias reached out, taking his hand in hers. You made the right choice, Issei. You chose your own path. Issei looked at her, the woman who had given him so much, and felt a warmth spread through his chest. I did. And I'll keep choosing it, as long as I have you. Rias smiled, her eyes filled with love. Always. As they stood together in the garden, the weight of Heaven's judgment faded into the background. Issei had found something more powerful than redemption through rules or judgment, he had found redemption through love. And with Rias by his side, he knew he could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The atmosphere was charged with tension as Issei stood at the heart of the battlefield, his wings now dark and feathered spread behind him. He could feel the storm brewing, a cosmic war that threatened to consume not just the forces of heaven and hell, but earth as well. The artifact, hidden for so long, had become a flashpoint of conflict between the celestial and infernal realms, and now, both sides were prepared to clash over its immense power. Issei had known this day would come, but standing in the eye of the storm, it felt more real and more dangerous than ever. On one side, the forces of heaven, led by Michael himself, radiated divine power, their white wings glowing with holy light. On the other side, Hell's armies, led by powerful devils including Ria's brother, Serzich's Lucifer, burned with dark energy, their eyes fixed on the prize. And there, standing between them, was Issei. The artifact, still hidden beneath the cathedral's altar, was the key to unimaginable power. If it fell into the wrong hands, it could tip the balance of the universe, and Issei knew that neither side could be trusted with it. Heaven, with its rigid laws, wanted control, while hell sought to use it for its own gain. But Issei had learned too much since his fall to believe in either side's righteousness. Both were flawed, and both were blinded by their own agendas. But Earth the humans had no stake in this war. They were innocents caught in the middle of a cosmic struggle they didn't understand. And Issei wasn't about to let them be collateral damage. Rias stood beside him, her crimson hair whipping in the wind as the forces of heaven and hell closed in. Her eyes were filled with determination, but Issei could sense the worry beneath her calm exterior. "This is going to get ugly," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the rising winds. Issei nodded, his heart heavy. "Yeah. It is." He glanced at Michael, who hovered in the air, his golden armor gleaming in the fading light. His former leader's expression was hard, unyielding. Michael was here to claim the artifact for heaven, and there was no room for negotiation in his mind. On the other side, Surziches floated above the ranks of devils, his power radiating with the force of a dark sun. Both sides were prepared to fight to the death. But Issei wasn't willing to let it come to that. "I can't let this happen," Issei muttered, more to himself than to Rias. Rias glanced at him, her expression softening. "What do you mean?" Issei took a deep breath, his wings twitching as the tension mounted. "They're both wrong, Rias. Heaven and hell. They're both so blinded by their own ideals that they can't see what's really at stake." Rias frowned, her gaze flickering between the two armies. "Then what do you want to do?" Issei's heart raced as he made his decision. "We need to stop them. We need to protect Earth, protect the artifact from both sides. If we let them fight over it, everything will be destroyed. There has to be a third way." Ria's eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked uncertain. "You're talking about going against both heaven and hell?" Issei nodded, his resolve hardening. "Yes. We can't let them use the artifact for their own purposes. I have to try and make them see that there's more at stake here than their war." Before Rias could respond, a blinding light erupted from the sky as Michael descended toward Issei, his wings glowing with holy power. Surziches, sensing the imminent clash, surged forward, his dark energy crackling through the air. The battlefield was moments away from exploding into chaos. "Issei Haidu," Michael called out, his voice echoing with divine authority. "Step aside. You are a fallen angel, no longer bound to heaven's light. This battle does not concern you." Issei clenched his fists, his wings flaring out behind him. "You're wrong, Michael. It does concern me. You're both about to destroy everything, and I can't let that happen." Surziches hovered nearby, his eyes narrowing at Issei's defiance. "You think you can stand in the way of both heaven and hell? You're one fallen angel, Issei. This war is bigger than you." Issei took a step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'm not standing in your way because I want power. I'm standing in your way because you're both wrong. You're fighting over something that could destroy the entire world, and you don't even care. I won't let you tear this planet apart." Michael's expression darkened, and the angels behind him shifted uneasily. "You have no authority here, Issei. You are a rogue. Fallen from grace. The artifact belongs to heaven, and it is heaven's responsibility to keep it safe." "And what will you do with it, Michael?" Issei shot back, his voice rising with emotion. "Lock it away. Use it to control everything. Heaven's laws don't protect people, they just keep them in line. You're not trying to protect Earth, you're trying to control it." Surzich's dark energy flared, and he folded his arms, watching the exchange with interest. "He has a point, Michael. Heaven isn't the only side capable of wielding this power. Hell could use the artifact for its own gain, and you know it." Michael's eyes flashed with anger. "The artifact must not fall into the hands of devils. Hell would use it to plunge the world into darkness." "And what would you do?" Issei shouted. "You'd use it to impose your own vision of perfection, just like you always have. But that's not what the world needs. The world doesn't need more rules, it needs a chance to find its own way." Rias stepped forward, her eyes fierce. "Issei's right. Both of you are fighting for control, but the people of Earth, they have the right to decide their own fate. The artifact belongs to no one. It's too dangerous for either side to claim." The tension in the air crackled as the two leaders faced off, the forces of heaven and hell poised for battle. But Issei could see it, could feel it. Neither side was willing to back down. They were too entrenched in their ideals, too blinded by their desire for control. "I'm not going to let this end in war," Issei said, his voice low but resolute. Michael's expression hardened. "You don't have a choice." With that, the battle erupted. Angels and devils clashed in a storm of light and darkness, their powers shaking the earth beneath them. Holy swords clashed with demonic energy, and the air was filled with the deafening roar of battle. Issei's heart raced as he watched the chaos unfold, but he couldn't afford to hesitate. Rias summoned her own power, her crimson aura blazing as she engaged with the attacking angels, her determination unwavering. Issei, torn between both sides, took to the sky, his wings carrying him above the battlefield. He had to find a way to stop this madness before it was too late. But no one was listening. As he hovered above the chaos, Issei's mind raced. He had to make them understand. He had to find a way to bridge the gap between heaven and hell, to stop the endless cycle of violence that threatened to consume everything. And then, in the midst of the battle, he had an idea. Summoning all of his strength, Issei dove back toward the center of the battlefield, landing with a thunderous impact. His wings flared out, and a pulse of dark energy rippled from him, drawing the attention of both armies. "Stop!" Issei shouted, his voice echoing across the battlefield. For a moment, the fighting ceased as both sides turned to look at him. Michael, his sword raised, hovered in the air, his eyes narrowing. Surziches, surrounded by his devilish power, watched with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "This artifact," Issei said, his voice strong and clear, "is too dangerous for either side to control. Heaven and hell are locked in a war that will never end, but the people of Earth, they're caught in the middle. You claim to protect them, but all you're doing is tearing their world apart." Michael's eyes darkened, but he remained silent, watching Issei with cold intensity. Issei continued, his voice rising. "There's another way. We can protect the artifact together. Not as enemies, but as allies. Heaven, hell, and Earth, all of us. We can guard this power, keep it safe, and stop the endless fighting." Surzich's lips curled into a smile. "You're proposing an alliance?" "Yes," Issei said firmly. "An alliance between heaven, hell, and those of us caught in between. If we work together, we can protect the artifact from those who would abuse its power. But if we keep fighting like this, we'll destroy everything." For a moment, silence reigned. The angels and devils watched their leaders, waiting for their response. Michael's expression remained hard, his wings glowing with holy light. "You ask for too much, Issei. Heaven cannot ally with devils." Surziches, however, seemed more intrigued. "And yet, heaven hasn't stopped fighting for control either, have they?" Perhaps Issei has a point. The tension in the air thickened as both sides waited for the final decision. But Issei knew that this battle wouldn't be won with words alone. He had made his stand, and now, the future of Earth and his place in it hung in the balance. The battlefield was a maelstrom of chaos. Angels and devils clashed violently in the sky, their powers lighting up the heavens in flashes of blinding light and dark energy. The roar of battle filled the air, but Issei's mind was eerily quiet as he stood at the center of it all, his heart pounding with the weight of a sudden realization. The artifact wasn't just a powerful relic, it was a key, a catalyst that had the potential to upset the balance of the entire cosmos. Issei had known it was dangerous, but now, with the war between heaven and hell erupting around him, he understood its true nature. The artifact held the power to reshape the fabric of reality itself, to merge or sever realms, to alter the very structure of existence. And in the wrong hands, it would destroy everything. His pulse quickened as the truth settled over him like a heavy weight. Heaven and hell weren't just fighting for control, they were fighting to bend reality to their will. No matter which side won, the Earth and all the realms that depended on its balance would be shattered. The artifact couldn't be allowed to exist. It had to be destroyed. But destroying it would come at a cost, one that Issei was only beginning to comprehend. The power required to obliterate something so intertwined with the fabric of existence would almost certainly kill him. It would mean giving up everything. His life, his love for Rias, and any hope of finding his place in the universe. But if it saved the world, if it saved Rias, it would be worth it. He clenched his fists, determination settling into his bones. He had made his decision. Issei's wings flared behind him, black feathers shimmering with a dark, ethereal glow. He shot toward the cathedral where the artifact was hidden, the winds whipping against him as he flew faster than ever before. Around him, the battle raged on, but his focus was unbreakable. He had one goal. To stop the war by destroying the artifact. Rias saw him go and immediately followed, her heart pounding with fear. She knew Issei well enough to sense that something was wrong, that he was about to do something reckless, something final. She surged after him, her crimson aura blazing through the air as she pushed herself to catch up. "Issei," she called out, her voice desperate. "Wait. What are you doing?" But Issei didn't slow down. His mind was racing as he descended toward the cathedral, his thoughts swirling with the enormity of what he was about to do. He knew Rias would try to stop him. She loved him, and he loved her, but he couldn't let his feelings for her prevent him from doing what had to be done. As he landed in front of the cathedral, Issei hesitated for a moment, his heart aching. The thought of leaving Rias behind, of never seeing her again, was almost too much to bear. But he couldn't let his emotions cloud his judgment. This wasn't just about them, this was about saving the entire world. Before he could step inside, Rias landed beside him, her expression a mixture of fear and determination. She grabbed his arm, her grip tight, as if she could physically hold him back from his decision. "Issei, stop." Rias' voice trembled with emotion. "What are you thinking? You can't just run in there and—" "I have to," Issei interrupted, his voice heavy with the weight of his choice. "Rias, the artifact, it's too dangerous. If we don't destroy it, everything will be lost. heaven, hell, earth, none of it will survive. Ria's eyes widened in shock, her grip on his arm tightening. But if you destroy it, you could die. Issei, you don't have to do this. We'll find another way. There's no other way, Issei said, his voice soft but firm. If we keep fighting over it, everything will fall apart. This is the only way to stop the war. Tears welled up in Ria's eyes as she shook her head, her heart breaking at the thought of losing him. No. I won't let you do this. You can't sacrifice yourself. Issei's own heart twisted painfully as he looked at her, but he knew there was no turning back. Rias, I love you. More than anything. But I can't let this war destroy everything we've fought for. I have to end it. Before Rias could respond, another figure landed nearby Irina, her golden wings glowing softly in the chaos. Her face was filled with shock and sorrow as she realized what Issei was planning. No, Issei, Irina said, her voice cracking with emotion. You can't do this. This isn't the answer. Issei looked at her, his oldest friend, and felt a pang of regret. Irina, I wish there was another way. But the artifact can't be allowed to exist. It's too powerful. Irina shook her head, tears streaming down her face. But there's still hope, Issei. You don't have to sacrifice yourself. You can still find redemption. I don't care about redemption, Issei said, his voice steady. I care about protecting the people I love. And if this is what it takes, then I'll do it. He turned away from them both, his wings glowing faintly with a mixture of light and darkness. He could feel the power of the artifact calling to him, its energy pulsing beneath the cathedral. He knew what he had to do, he had to destroy it, even if it cost him everything. But before he could enter the cathedral, a familiar presence descended from the sky. Rainer. The fallen angel landed gracefully in front of him, her dark wings spreading wide as she smirked. Going somewhere, Issei. Issei's heart pounded in his chest as he faced her, his mind racing. He had almost forgotten about Rainer in the chaos of the battle, but now she stood in his way, her eyes gleaming with malicious intent. You're not going to stop me, Issei said, his voice low and dangerous. Rainer's smirk widened. I know what you're planning. And I can't let you ruin everything. The artifact is the key to power, Issei. Power that neither heaven nor hell can control. But you're different. You have both angelic and fallen power. You could wield it. Issei narrowed his eyes. I'm not interested in power, Rainer. I'm here to destroy it. Rainer's expression darkened. Then you're a fool. She lunged at him, her wings propelling her forward with lightning speed. Issei barely had time to react as her dark energy surged toward him, but he didn't back down. He summoned his own power, a mixture of the holy light of his former angelic self and the dark energy of his fallen status. Their clash was explosive, light and darkness colliding in a blinding display of power. Issei gritted his teeth as he fought against Rainer, his heart pounding with the weight of his decision. He could feel the artifact's power resonating in the air, pulling at him, tempting him with its raw potential. But Issei knew better. He wasn't here to claim power. He was here to stop it from destroying everything. As the battle raged on, Issei's powers surged within him, both his angelic light and his fallen darkness blending together in perfect harmony. He realized in that moment that he wasn't just a fallen angel. He wasn't bound by heaven's laws, nor was he a slave to hell's desires. He was something more. Something greater. With a roar of determination, Issei unleashed his full power, a blinding wave of energy that sent Rainer flying back, her wings singed and her body crumpling to the ground. She glared up at him, fury in her eyes, but Issei didn't waver. I'm not like you, Issei said, his voice filled with resolve. I'm not here to take power. I'm here to protect the ones I love. Without another word, Issei turned and sprinted toward the cathedral, his wings glowing with the combined energy of light and darkness. He could feel the artifact's power growing stronger, pulling him toward it like a beacon. Rias and Irina called out to him, their voices filled with desperation, but Issei didn't stop. He couldn't. The fate of the world was in his hands, and he was the only one who could make the ultimate sacrifice. As he entered the cathedral, the air crackled with energy, the artifact pulsing with immense power. Issei approached it slowly, his heart racing with the knowledge of what he was about to do. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice breaking. With one final surge of power, Issei reached out and touched the artifact, pouring all of his energy, both light and dark, into it. The artifact blazed with light, its power overwhelming as it began to unravel. And then, with a deafening explosion of energy, the artifact shattered, its power dissolving into nothingness. Issei collapsed to the ground, his wings dimming as the last of his strength left him. The world around him grew quiet, the battle outside fading into the distance. He had done it. He had destroyed the artifact. But at what cost? The explosion of light that followed the destruction of the artifact was blinding. For a moment, the entire world seemed to stop. Time itself held its breath as the immense power of the artifact unraveled and dissolved into nothingness. Issei lay on the cold stone floor of the cathedral, his breath shallow, his body weak. He had given everything to destroy the artifact, to stop the war between heaven and hell, and to protect the ones he loved. And now, it was over. But as the light began to fade, something strange happened. Issei, expecting the pull of darkness and the cold embrace of death, instead felt warmth spreading through his body. His vision, blurry and dim, began to clear, and he became aware of a soft golden light surrounding him. It wasn't the harsh blinding radiance of the artifact, it was gentle, pure, and comforting. His heartbeat slowed, and for a moment, Issei felt a sense of peace unlike anything he had ever known. His body, once drained of strength, began to fill with energy again, an energy that felt both familiar and entirely new. Slowly, Issei pushed himself up from the ground, his hands trembling as he regained his footing. The golden light enveloped him, and as he stood, his wings once dark and fallen began to change. Feathers, golden and radiant, unfurled from his back, glowing with a soft, celestial hue that filled the entire cathedral. Issei looked over his shoulder in awe, watching as his wings, neither fully angelic nor fallen, took on a new form. They shimmered with a light that was neither bound to heaven nor tainted by hell. It was something else, something greater. Issei. The voice was soft, filled with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Issei turned to see Rias standing in the doorway of the cathedral, her crimson hair glowing in the warm light of his new wings. Her eyes were wide, her expression one of pure amazement. I thought you. Rias' voice broke, tears brimming in her eyes. She rushed toward him, throwing her arms around him in a tight embrace, her body trembling with relief. I thought I'd lost you. Issei held her close, his heart pounding with emotion as he buried his face in her hair. I thought I was gone too, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. But something happened. I don't know what. Rias pulled back slightly, her hands resting on his chest as she looked up at him, her eyes glistening with tears. Your wings, they're different. You're different. Issei looked down at himself, the golden light still radiating from his wings. He could feel the power flowing through him, a power that was neither the holy energy of heaven nor the dark energy of hell. It was something entirely new, something born from the choices he had made, from the balance he had found between light and dark. I'm not just an angel anymore, Issei murmured, his gaze shifting to the remnants of the artifact, now nothing more than shards of energy scattered across the cathedral floor. I think I've become something else. Before he could say more, a familiar presence entered the cathedral. Michael, the leader of heaven's forces, his wings glowing with divine light. His expression was unreadable as he approached Issei, his eyes scanning the scene, taking in the destruction of the artifact and the transformation of the young fallen angel before him. Issei, Michael said, his voice calm but filled with gravity. You have done what no one else could. You destroyed the artifact, and in doing so, you saved all the realms from disaster. Issei met Michael's gaze, his heart still racing from the intensity of the battle. I didn't do it for heaven or hell, he said quietly. I did it to protect the people I care about. To stop the war. Michael's expression softened slightly, and for the first time, Issei saw something other than disappointment in his eyes. There was understanding, even respect. Your actions were not just those of a fallen angel seeking redemption, Michael continued. You have transcended the boundaries that once defined you. Your wings, they reflect a new kind of balance, a harmony between light and darkness. Issei looked down at his glowing wings once more, the golden light pulsing softly around him. He had never imagined this, never thought that he could be something beyond the rigid laws of heaven or the chaotic freedom of hell. But now, standing here with both Rias and Michael before him, he understood that his path had always been about finding balance. Not just between realms, but within himself. What does this mean? Issei asked, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. What am I now? Michael stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. You are neither fully an angel nor a fallen one. You have become a being of balance, Issei. A force that stands between light and darkness, between heaven and hell. You are something greater, something that the realms have never seen before. Rias squeezed Issei's hand, her eyes filled with pride and love. You've always been more than just an angel or a fallen one. You've always fought for what you believed in, no matter what. Issei's heart swelled with emotion as he looked at her, the woman who had stood by his side through everything. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Michael watched the exchange with a quiet sense of approval. Issei, your actions today have earned you more than just the forgiveness of heaven. You have earned your place in the balance of the realms. You are free to forge your own path, free from the constraints of heaven's laws. Issei blinked in surprise. You're forgiving me? Michael nodded. Your fall was not the end of your story, Issei. It was the beginning of something greater. Heaven no longer sees you as a threat. You are not bound to us, but we recognize the importance of what you've become. For a moment, Issei was speechless. He had expected judgment, punishment, perhaps even exile. But forgiveness. Freedom. It was more than he had ever imagined. And with that freedom came the realization that he no longer needed to choose between heaven and hell. He could walk his own path. What happens now? Rias asked softly, her gaze shifting between Issei and Michael. Michael's wings shimmered in the golden light of the cathedral as he stepped back, giving Issei a small nod of respect. Now, you are free to choose your own future, Issei. Heaven will not interfere, nor will we seek to claim the artifact's remnants. You have earned your place as a protector of balance. Issei took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling over him. He wasn't bound by heaven's laws anymore, and he wasn't a fallen angel wandering without purpose. He was something new, something that had never existed before. And with Rias by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came next. I think it's time for a new adventure, Issei said, his voice filled with quiet determination. I'm not going back to heaven or hell. I'm going to protect the world I care about, but on my own terms. Rias smiled, her eyes shining with pride and love. Then I'm coming with you. Michael gave a small, approving nod. Very well. You are free to walk your own path, Issei. May you continue to protect the balance between the realms, and may you find peace in your new role. With those final words, Michael turned and ascended, his form dissolving into light as he returned to the heavens. The cathedral grew quiet once more, the echoes of the battle fading into the distance. Issei stood there for a moment, his heart full, his wings glowing with the soft golden light of his new existence. He had lost so much, but he had gained even more freedom, love, and a purpose that was entirely his own. Rias took his hand, her fingers entwining with his as they stood side by side, the weight of the future resting lightly on their shoulders. So Rias said with a teasing smile, where do we go from here? Issei looked at her, the woman he loved more than anything in the world, and felt a surge of excitement for the first time in a long while. The possibilities stretched out before them endless, boundless, and filled with promise. Anywhere we want, Issei said with a grin, his wings spreading wide behind him. We're free now. Together, they stepped out of the cathedral, leaving behind the remnants of the war and the shattered artifact. The sky above was clear, the sun shining brightly on the horizon as they walked into a new dawn, one filled with endless possibilities, adventures, and a future they would forge together. Issei was no longer bound by the past, by heaven's laws, or by the weight of his fall. He was something new, something born from balance, from love, and from his determination to protect the ones he cared about. And with Rias by his side, there was nothing they couldn't face. As they took flight together, soaring into the endless sky, Issei knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. End of the here. So that's it for today's video, guys. Before you go, just like the video and share it with your friends. Bye.